Thanks for tuning in. I'm Nicole Mischke. Talk of the looming fiscal cliff has been all over the news networks across the country lately. Everyone seems to be clinging to any last bit of hope that Washington will somehow be able to come together. The fiscal cliff has been defined in the public as the crash our economy is going to take when the Bush-era tax breaks expire. But why weren't we talking about this and trying to find a solution years ago? Didn't our governing leaders know this would happen? What is really going on? For me personally, that's the question I continue to ask myself, and I think it's a feeling shared by many of you. What is really going on in Washington? I didn't grow up in a politically outspoken family. My parents were conservative, but tended to keep their views to themselves. This has left me searching for my own opinion in the last few years. Agendas aside, I honestly do not know who or what to believe. I'm constantly hearing leaders contradict themselves. I'm constantly hearing the facts change. It seems all Washington does is point fingers. Republicans say our economy is so messed up because of the Democrats, and the Democrats say it's the Republicans' fault. Because of this divisiveness, nothing is being accomplished. I want to know what is going on. I want to know the truth. I want to know the solution, and I want to get our country back into shape for the sake of my own future, but also for the sake of my daughter's future and her children's future. I would like to bring in Dale Fruit. Dale is a Spokane local, a political guru. He is the president of Corporate Logic, a business consulting company, and also a writer. Dale, you are here to share a viewpoint today that is widely talked to, or is not widely talked about, and it's not widely accepted, but it's an opinion that you think is very important that people need to hear. And you're here to talk about that today.
Yeah, the fiscal cliff, as they call it, I don't know who coined it. I don't know if it's the Congress, the Senate, the president, or somebody in the news media. But the truth of the matter is the problem is way more severe than it's getting airtime.
You think the fiscal cliff is just a distraction from a much larger issue?
It is absolutely a red herring to take away from the real issue. The real issue is what they're proposing is 3% cuts, or a 3% increase in taxes, essentially taking away the Bush tax cuts, and then some mysterious budget cuts that we haven't quantified or even identified yet. Those are the two sides of it. If we were to put those two together, if we take our president at his word, he's going to cut 10 to 1 for whatever revenues we bring in, he'll add 10 times that in cuts. If we did that, what we're talking about is so negligible, it has absolutely no effect on our economy. It would have an effect on our economy in a sense, but it wouldn't have any effect on paying down our debt.
So what you're saying is that our debt, our national debt right now is so huge that this talk of increasing taxes for the rich and making some cuts would really not touch our national debt at all.
Wouldn't even come close to it.
Here are some of the facts right now. $16.4 trillion in debt. Our gross domestic product is $15.5 trillion. You want to talk about some of these numbers?
Sure. So I think that's really the nature of what we're trying to do right here today is quantify what the problem is. Instead of saying fiscal cliff, let's put this in a mathematical equation. So when somebody does bring up a solution, we can actually index that or use that in the equation to say, does this actually mitigate the problem, or is it just, like I said, a red herring? So our basically right now we're at 105% of our gross domestic product of our debt. And
we can bring that full page back
if
up
you
in a
bring
second.
that back
we
up,
can go through all of the
there's 72 trillion also in unfunded liabilities that are tied to Social Security and Medicare. That's also debt that the public is.
What our government is obligated to pay to us, but they don't have the money for it.
That's correct.
$72 trillion.
72 trillion. And then there's derivatives out there too that are in the hundreds of trillions of dollars that the public is also liable for.
In 2010, Social Security spent more money than it took in. We all know this is a huge problem. The talk of Social Security just not being there when many people living in my generation, my daughter's generation, your generation need to use it. The trade deficit went from $500 billion to $558 billion in 2011. Talk about what that means.
There's a killer. In my view, my judgment is a trade deficit is an indicator that the United States has failed to tool to a global market. We obviously we're in a global market. You can refute it if you want, but we are. The United States obligation now, and how we really got out of a lot of trouble after World War II, is that we had a trained labor force, a skilled labor force, an education system, and an infrastructure that allowed us to build things and get it out to the world. We don't have any of that going on right now. We have failures in all of those measures, and now you can see it in numbers. It's quantified. The trade deficit goes up because we're buying so many we're a consumer-based economy. We're buying so many things and we're not making anything that people want, or we're not making things at a price point that people can afford.
Mm-hmm. So we need to start thinking about building that infrastructure to be able to sell our own goods at a price other countries can afford and sell goods that they want.
And there's the mother of all questions. How do you go about doing that? And you have to, and that's where this gets, there's no off-the-shelf turnkey solution to this. It is very, very involved. It goes back to the family, it goes back to education, how we're educated. Our education system right now falls way, way down on industrialized nations, and that you can't possibly grow out of that with a failing education system.
I kind of explained in the beginning, I personally feel kind of hopeless in all of this. I don't feel like I truly grasp and understand everything that is being done in Washington. I don't know who to trust. I don't know what's factual, what's correct. We went out on the street, downtown Spokane, Dale and I took a camera, went out on the street and asked local people walking around their views on the fiscal cliff. And it was unanimously the same feeling. There was wide ignorance, kind of. I mean, everyone kind of thinks that they understand what's going on, but no one really does. And we weren't out there to make people feel stupid by any means, but it was just really to show that there is a serious problem here, that we as the American people don't even really understand the problems. Everyone seems to be pointing fingers.
Are we in debt right now currently?
Well, yeah, we're in debt, but that was caused by the Republicans also. We had a surplus in 2000.
So there you go right there, pointing fingers. You know, he said it was the Republicans' fault. There were other people saying that it was the Democrats' fault. And he talks about a surplus that Clinton had when he came into office. And we're going to talk about the difference between a budget surplus and the national debt.
Yeah, and that's kind of people use those terms synonymously. I mean, people who are versed in it certainly don't. But what we saw out on the street is that there were a lot of people that used a budget surplus or a budget deficit and the debt synonymously. So there's in some pockets they believe that Clinton handed a budget. We had no debt when President Bush took office. What we actually had was a budget surplus. But that budget surplus never served the debt while Bill Clinton was in office. So the debt went up $1.6 trillion while Bill Clinton was in office. Yet on the annual budget in the budget year, he ran a surplus. So people took that as, oh, well, we paid off the debt. We had no debt. George Bush started it all.
And you can kind of put that into terms, if you had a budget of $20,000 for the year and you only spent $10,000, you'll have a budget surplus of $10,000.
But you
could still have debt for, your $200,000 house or whatever. That's exactly what we're talking about here.
Exactly, that's well put.
When we were out there on the street also, there was this widespread feeling that nothing is getting accomplished in Washington.
There's just so much antagonism between the two parties that I don't know if anything's ever really going to get solved, It just sort of, sometimes you feel kind of hopeless about it.
She was talking about her frustration and feeling like no one's doing anything. Explain the issue with us having a debt-based economy and our dollar not being backed by gold anymore. A lot of people, when we were out there talking on the street, thought that our dollar was still backed by gold.
It was shocking how many people thought that our dollar was backed by gold. And you mentioned you're confused. There were a lot of people out there that were confused. I'm confused. No matter how hard you study this, there's so many variables involved in it. It's difficult to get a command of it. But this is an interesting story. Ron Paul was in the Senate Finance Committee, and a ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee leaned over, a female, and said, "Are you trying to tell me that our dollar is not backed by gold?" So if we're under the belief that the Congress, the Senate, and the President have a handle on this economy and the nature of it and how it works, I think that's the first step we need to take, is refute that and say they don't. They clearly don't, by the numbers, by our debt. You mentioned the nature of our money. Our money supply, a dollar actually represents debt. all of our money is tied to debt. When we go through the Federal Reserve, which is a group of private banks, and the Treasury actually makes money, that money is necessarily tied to debt.
Every dollar that's out there circulating has interest attached to it.
There's no possible way of paying off that current dollar in circulation without borrowing more. And that's why you see from the beginning of the Federal Reserve in 1913, that's why you see as our economy expanded, our debt expands, because that's exactly what a fiat system is.
And this topic of every dollar being attached to interest, I personally am still having a hard time wrapping my brain around the entire concept. But the point is that since 1913, when the Federal Reserve came to be, we have continually gone into debt. And what you are saying is that this system, the way that our economy is working, was set up to, yes, allow an economy to take off and grow quickly, but it is bound to fail. We continue to go in more and more and more debt, and eventually it's just not going to work. It's going to fall off the cliff, as they're saying.
The root of the issue is exactly that. In 1971, we went off the gold standard. The Federal Reserve started in 1913, but in 1971, when we went off the gold standard, our dollar was literally tied to nothing. We had no asset backing it. So between those two, between private banks issuing the United States money and us going off the gold standard, it identical to what's happened in world history through 35, 40 different currencies. They've all collapsed.
We spoke with a former federal judge on the street who was also very frustrated. And when people wake up and start to realize that nothing is being done as he has, they're probably going to feel the same way.
When you look at all the talk shows, the news channels, the newspapers, are you frustrated when that there's nobody speaking in plain English and math?
I am more than frustrated. The president needs to learn how to negotiate and not pontificate. And Congress needs to figure out how to work together and actually put things on paper in simple, clear terms that everybody can deal with, and they need to get on with it.
That's a former federal judge saying those things.
Guy who's very, very well versed in what's going on. He studies it, and the frustration, and I think we all share that. We got to make this apolitical. It can't be left and right. It has to be we the people quantifying this, putting it in an equation, and agreeing to the terms and coming up with a solution. And then there's a former federal judge looking at that and saying, this makes no sense. I'm frustrated when I hear people talking about it, because they're just speaking in a lot
of your frustration, you've spoken with a lot of economists, and they all say that when you look at those numbers that we put up there, our debt, everything that we owe, it is not possible to get out of this with printing more money. Like, we are bound to fail. There is no way that Congress can increase taxes enough or make enough cuts that we could possibly stop going into debt and start paying this off.
And when you say that, it sounds like Chicken Little, like it's just completely catastrophic. But knowing it in advance before it happens, there are measures we can take to hopefully do a belly landing in the Hudson instead of corkscrewing into the side of a mountain.
You mentioned Germany was an example from history that we could learn from.
Post-World War I Germany, it's so closely related to what we're going through right now. They just printed more money. It was tied to nothing. It was a fiat dollar. They printed more money, and they suffered from hyperinflation, and the dollar literally became nothing. They're throwing it out of windows and burning it in barrels for heat. So we need to look at all of these circumstances in history and learn from it and take our given set of circumstances and, most importantly, educate ourselves, but look at our elected officials and hold them accountable for what is actually going on. Give them numbers. And when they say we're going to raise taxes 3% or we're going to cut this, hold them accountable for what that actually means to the equation. Because once you're given the numbers and you run the math, you'll realize how ridiculous all these headlines are. They're worth nothing.
Because it's not even touching the problem.
Not even coming close. Mm-hmm. The nature of the problem is the nature of our money, and that is debt.
Let's talk about President Kennedy, President Lincoln, and President Garfield.
Yeah, three very, very unfortunate, I don't know if you'd call it causation or correlation. Kennedy, Lincoln, and Garfield all spoke, in different ways. Kennedy passed a law trying to get the dollar backed by silver, and shortly thereafter he was executed. Lincoln actually printed his own greenback. He printed about 4.4 million to fund the war, and soon after that he was executed. After his execution, they went back to the other dollar system, and then James Garfield was another strong opponent of private banks issuing the United States money, and when he voiced it, he was executed. And I can't tell you that is why, but the correlation is so strong when you study those three. There are powers that be that are manipulating our money system, the private banks that actually issue the federal government the loans that are extremely powerful. And
lots and lots of money in their hands.
lots of money, lots
Money
of
is
power.
power.
And it's a long sordid history.
And you know, we just want to end on saying you think the way out of this is to educate yourself. As I have said, as many people on the street said, it's very frustrating to not really feel like you can understand exactly what's going on. You 3 years ago were a hardcore Republican, and today you stand back and you say this just seems ridiculous, that there could be two sides who both claim to be Americans but can be so at each other's throats and so divisive in something, so much so that nothing is getting accomplished. And you have really had to work hard to educate yourself to really understand this at the level you do today.
You have to surrender what you want to believe or what you were taught or the house you were raised in, the ideologies that you were raised with. You have to be willing to surrender that and look at what actually is and look at world history and find out if your worldviews actually jive with what is. And it's difficult because when you do that, when you separate yourself from the dichotomy of left and right, Republican, Democrat, when you do that, you really are in a very small group of people, and it makes you feel kind of funny. It's like, geez, how come no one else is saying this? And then you find, we found a couple out there on the street, you find people that actually get it and like, okay, I'm not crazy. And you just keep digging and researching and digging and researching because none of this is on the top layer of news. You've got to dig to
And
find
I think that, like I said, everybody can agree that nothing is happening in Washington. There's too much controversy and no one knows how to compromise. Something needs to change, and it needs to start with us informing ourselves. Instead of taking what you hear from your Republican or Democratic leader, those people you look up to, check that information yourself. Don't just take it as fact because it came from someone who you support in Congress or in the Senate. And I think that we all need to start holding each other accountable and really, as a country, come together and figure out what we can do to get out of this mess for the sake of our kids and for the sake of each other. If you would like to contact Dale, he would love to talk with anybody, dispute anything that he said.
Do you have any variance of opinion? You take exception to what I said, please write me and voice that. I would like everything quantified if possible. If you've got a difference of opinion, quantify it with numbers so I can actually understand what your point is, what your position is, and I would encourage anybody to do that.
We've got his email address right there, corporatelogic@me.com. And Dale, thank you so much for being here today. Yeah. Thanks for watching.